Welcome back. Today we are bringing you an explainer on a truly hilarious, deeply confessional, and honestly a surprisingly profound memoir by Clement Vague. It's called 40 Years of Nodding Like I Understood. And let me tell you, this is absolutely the book for anyone who has ever aggressively agreed with something they completely didn't comprehend just to survive a social interaction. So, okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever found yourself trapped at a dinner party, just swirling a glass of wine, nodding slowly while someone explains the economy, and inside you are completely adrift? Yeah, us too. We all perform comprehension to some degree, right? We just don't want to look uninformed. But Clement Vague, he did this every single day, for 4 decades, across almost every conceivable topic of adult conversation.
He actually describes himself as a man-shaped collection of nodding gestures. Literally. But his breaking point finally arrived during a dinner party. He was asked his opinion on algorithmic curation, and he delivered this perfectly constructed, completely meaningless sentence of pure jargon. And when someone replied exactly, the sheer weight of his 40-year facade just broke him. He retreated to the host's bathroom, sat on the slow-closed toilet lid, and decided right then and there it was finally time to go home, open his laptop, and actually look up all the things he'd been pretending to know.
Section 1. The Anatomy of Nodding, a field guide to faking it.
Before we get into what Clement actually learned, we really have to understand how he survived this long. He developed these highly sophisticated coping mechanisms. And honestly, it's fascinating how universal these physical gestures are. Take the ministerial nod, for example. It's a slow, measured descent with just a slight lip compression. It's absolutely perfect for when you have no earthly idea what to do with the information you just received. Or what about the pensive tilt? You tilt your head to the right, look up a bit, as if you're weighing this incredibly complex philosophical point. But in reality, you are just desperately buying time. I guarantee every single person listening has deployed the pensive tilt when cornered in a debate.
Section 2. Faking the dinner party. Demystifying wine and cheese.
Let's start with the ultimate battleground of pretentious conversation: wine. For decades, Clement would swirl his glass and casually drop utterly meaningless phrases like structurally confident. I mean, wine is a liquid. It doesn't have structural integrity. But way back in 1997, a woman complimented him, saying he had good instincts about tannins. And for the next 26 years, Clement carried the word tannins around like a stolen watch. He deployed it constantly to sound sophisticated, fully assuming it was just a fancy flavor profile, kind of like strawberry or vanilla.
Well, here's the crucial point. Tannins are not a flavor at all. Actually, they are polyphenolic compounds. It's pure chemistry. Tannins naturally occur in grape skins, the seeds, and those oak barrels the wine is aged in. So when you drink a glass of red wine, these compounds physically bind to the proteins in your saliva, literally temporarily disabling your mouth's ability to stay moist. That puckering, totally dry sensation Clement thought was the wine being important? Yeah, no. He was just dehydrated and putting on a performance.
And the cheese board? Oh, that was a whole other crime scene. Clement used to describe smelly washed-rind cheeses as very alive, totally thinking he was just using a cool, pretentious metaphor. But the wildest part is that he was actually telling the scientific truth. Those bright orange rinds are washed in brine, and they actually cultivate a bacteria called Brevibacterium linens, which, by the way, is the exact same bacteria responsible for human foot odor. And when he'd throw around the word memoir to sound smart, he was actually naming the literal, irreplaceable microbial ecosystem of a specific region that genuinely changes the flavor of the cheese. He was right without even knowing it.
Section 3. The algorithm already knows. The tech and culture facade.
Moving from the dining room right into the digital world, Clement tackled our collective, low-grade anxiety about technology. For years, he essentially believed 2 things. 1, that the algorithm was this judgmental, tiny wizard assessing his worth, and 2, that his phone was literally listening to his conversations to serve him ads. But in reality, an algorithm is just math. It's just a set of rules. Your phone isn't actively listening to you because, frankly, it doesn't need to. The tracking systems are so deeply woven into your behavioral data, your age, your location, and the data of millions of other users who click just like you do that it can statistically predict you're going to buy running shoes before you ever even say it out loud. It's essentially a massive math mirror.
And this brings us right back to that exact, perfectly constructed sentence of pure vibes that caused Clement's bathroom epiphany. He said it to a PhD student researching algorithms. And the crazy part?
He accidentally stumbled onto a massive, very real phenomenon known as the filter bubble. It's where the system records what you like, it recommends similar things, you watch those, and the band of your interest progressively narrows until you are entirely insulated from any sort of surprise. He literally built a sentence just to sound smart, but he was accidentally asking one of the absolute most vital questions in tech ethics today.
This facade bled perfectly into the humanities, too. Clement spent 30 whole years using the word postmodern to mean, a self-aware building or a movie that winks at the audience. But postmodernism isn't just some fancy French vibe. It is the fundamental rejection of grand narratives. Thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida argued that every system of meaning, every historical truth, is produced by someone standing somewhere, wielding power. It's a crucial framework for understanding how power literally shapes what we accept as knowledge.
Clement also famously faked his way through film critique. At one dinner party, he confidently described a famously ambiguous movie ending that just cuts to black as a rejection of closure as a bourgeois convention. And wow, this brilliantly illustrates his whole charade, because when he finally researched that specific film, he found out that the director actually shot two different endings, both tested terribly with audiences, and a producer just told him to cut to black to save 3 minutes of budget on the print run. The meaning of art, as it turns out, lives in the viewer's experience, even when the artist's intent was really just practical accounting.
Section 4. Pretending to understand finance. The financial fog.
Okay, this is the ultimate adult anxiety, isn't it? Nodding through economic conversations without having the faintest idea how the machine actually works. The Fed, interest rates, yield curves, quantitative easing, shorting, derivatives. Clement used these terms as conversational smoke bombs for 34 years. If someone brought up a financial crisis, he'd just nod gravely and say, well, it depends what the Fed does. Because it sounds incredibly informed and, technically, it's always true. But he had absolutely no idea what these mechanisms actually were.
To break through all that abstract jargon, just think about this number, $263,000. That is the approximate extra cost you will pay over the life of a standard $300,000 mortgage if interest rates jump from 3% to 7%. Clement had this huge realization that he had been paying a mortgage for 20 years without ever once looking up the mechanism that actually determined its cost.
So, who actually sets that rate? The Federal Reserve. The Fed basically acts as a massive economic thermostat. By adjusting just a single dial, the federal funds rate, which is essentially what banks charge each other for overnight loans, a tiny committee sends huge ripples through a $25 trillion economy. If they raise the rate, borrowing gets expensive, spending drops, and inflation cools down. It turns out this one obscure mechanism dictates every single mortgage, savings account, and small business loan in our lives.
Section 5. The Jazz Revelation. Finding profound meaning in the music. I want to slow down a little bit here, because this is where Clement's confessional journey really shifts from comedy into something deeply emotional. For decades, Clement just used jazz as ambient wallpaper to perform his own sophistication. When he actually listened, he always felt like he was just hearing musicians playing the completely wrong notes in chaotic isolation. But the reality is entirely different. Jazz isn't random chaos. It is a high-speed, real-time conversation. The musicians share a highly complex structural language, and they are listening and responding to each other at a tempo that leaves absolutely zero room for second-guessing.
To really get this, you have to understand syncopation. See, Western classical music emphasizes strong, predictable beats to orient the listener. But syncopation shifts that emphasis to the weak beats, or even the spaces right between the beats. Clement thought the notes were wrong, but he was just listening with the wrong rhythmic orientation. The musicians weren't lost at all. They were creating a deeply layered, intensely human sense of time where freedom and strict structure beautifully coexist.
This profound realization led to Clement's massive apology to John Coltrane. Clement used to name-drop Coltrane at parties just to sound smart, But when he finally put on headphones at 3 in the morning and truly listened to A Love Supreme, it just broke him open. Born in the Jim Crow South, Coltrane fought through severe addiction, finally got clean, and recorded this 33-minute devotional suite as a pure, unfiltered offering of gratitude. And he was dead from cancer just 3 years later at age 40. Clement realized he'd been using a man's profound spiritual triumph as a cheap party trick, and that realization, it required a formal, life-altering apology.
Section 6. The Power of Not Knowing. Trading the Performance for Curiosity. Which brings us to the true cost of faking it for 40 years. Clement realized that by constantly performing, he had basically spent his entire life sitting in the audience of his own experiences.
rather than actually participating in them. When we nod to hide our ignorance, we literally kill the possibility of actual connection. Because here's the secret. When you admit you don't know something, it ceases to be an enemy. It just becomes something you haven't met yet. Ignorance isn't a brick wall. It's actually a doorway into genuine literature, amazing music, art, and authentic human connection.
And that leaves us with this final thought. The next time you're at a dinner party or in a meeting and someone drops a term you just don't understand, whether it's about the economy or a fancy wine or a piece of art, what would happen if you finally stopped nodding, embraced the vulnerability, and simply asked, what does that actually mean? You might just learn something amazing. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.